Hey guys, this is Patrick from STH, and today we're going to talk about something exciting, and that is this thing. Now, this is the Lenovo ThinkCentre M920 or M920q Tiny. And the reason that we're saying this is either the M920 or M920q is actually if you go to the Lenovo website, even today, and you go click on the M920 Tiny, it'll take you to the M920q Tiny page. But in the future, we actually have the M920X, which we're going to review in a little while. And that actually has a GPU in it. And it's actually really cool. It's a little different than this, but pretty similar also. So we're just going to call this the M920 for now, but it's also an M920Q. Now, this is part of our Project Tiny Mini Micro series. And as part of Project Tiny Mini Micro, we're looking at all of these, 1 liter-ish size chassis and systems that are very popular in the corporate desktop world and actually could have a life either as desktops or as small server nodes at home. We already have guides on the STH main site in terms of, Nick has guides on turning these nodes into pfSense nodes. We also have a guide in terms of using these as Plex servers. And in all of these units, we're not just using Windows 10 to use these as desktops, we're also installing Proxmox so that way we can ensure that these systems will work under Debian Linux, and also you'll be able to use them as virtualization hosts. So of course, we're going to have those links in the description. Go check those out if you want to learn more about how we use these Project Tiny Mini Micro nodes. Now, this Lenovo M920 unit is actually really cool. It's one of the newer units that we have, and it actually uses a 9th generation Intel Core processor. And yeah, like anything, by the time you get to the 9th generation, you had to have some refinements. Specifically, we got this unit for $475 on eBay. However, we were looking at the Lenovo site and specifically the Lenovo outlet, and you can get something that's pretty similar to the configuration that we're testing here. And I think it was like $522 new on the Lenovo outlet today. So you can go check that out. That deal probably by the time this video gets up will be gone, but at least you know that there are opportunities to get these things for a relatively decent price. Now, I know you're really interested to see the unit itself. However, you're probably also wondering what in the heck I'm wearing. And this is actually the first STH sweatshirt that you can actually see on our Teespring shop, which you can see down below this video. If you want to support STH and Project Tiny Mini Micro, this is a good one to get, especially as it's kind of getting colder in the Northern Hemisphere and you might need a sweatshirt. Maybe you want this one. All right, so let's talk a little bit about features here. So on the front of the unit, we can see something that's actually a pretty standard layout for a lot of these. We have the power button, we also have a headset jack and a separate microphone jack as well. For USB, on the front of the system, we have a Type A USB 3 port, and we also have a Type C port. Personally, I really like the Type C ports because I think that adds another layer of flexibility. There are NICs, there are SSDs that are taking Type C, and plus if you just want to go connect your phone or something like that to the system, you can do that really easily using the Type C port. Now, when we turn to the back of the unit, we actually see quite a few features that are a little bit different as well. So the first thing that you're going to notice is that there is a display port and an HDMI port. And that's kind of a hallmark really of a lot of these Lenovo systems that you get both of those ports. We are just going to quickly note that there is an optional slot in the M920 or M920Q, and that optional slot actually has a ton of flexibility that's way beyond what we even have in the system. Now, in this system, we have 2 serial ports, but you could also have configurations where you have nothing. You could have configurations where you have another HDMI display port, VGA port. You could also have one of those ports, plus you could have a serial port. There are options that you can remove this blanking an extra port and have a NIC installed or something like that. There are also, I didn't even know this, but Lenovo has options that you can use a PCIe riser in the system, and you could actually get things like a Thunderbolt port installed in this little slot. So especially if you're going to look at these things secondhand, you should definitely look at what is in this slot up here, because where we have 2 serial ports, I think that's something that you might want to look at because you could get lucky and find something really cool there. At the same time, the 2 serial port configurations actually kind of interesting in itself, because with 2 serial ports, that means that we can go and control units that need serial connections directly without having to use a USB adapter. Now, I don't necessarily think it's the greatest use of space, but at the same time, it kind of tells you that Lenovo was not just selling these as desktops. I mean, how many desktop users these days need a serial interface? Very few, but there are a lot of engineering fields. There are people and a lot of companies that are actually using these not just as desktops, but they're also using these to control devices in other types of facilities. And so because of that, there are serial ports here, and that's kind of cool. For a home lab, you may actually want to get these extra serial ports, so that could be something that you're actually looking for specifically. The other feature on the back of the unit that we really want to talk about is USB ports, because there are a total of 4 USB ports, but they're not your same vanilla ports that you've seen on a lot of other units. Now, some of the other Project Tiny Mini micro nodes that we've looked at have both Gen 2 and Gen 3 ports. All of them have at least some Gen 3 ports, just because we are looking at basically the DDR4 generation and newer. But what's a little bit different about this system is that we don't just get the 5 gigabit per second Gen 1 ports, we also get the 10 gigabit per second USB Gen 2 ports. And having a 10 gigabit per second USB port actually means that you could get higher data transfer rates to a USB SSD that's on this 10 gigabit port than you could on a SATA device. Now, on the STH main site, we've actually looked at a couple of the USB 10 gigabit per second drives, and they actually do perform better, and they have better sequential reads and writes than you would on a SATA SSD. And that's just kind of showing the times where you can get external USB drives that are actually faster than SATA these days. And that's just something that's kind of interesting. And it's nice that we have these ports. Also, if you want to go have something like a 5 gigabit or a 2.5 gigabit NIC, these are great ports for that. Okay, now opening up the unit is about what we see on most Lenovo units. There's a single screw, you undo the screw, and you just simply pop off the top. Boom. Now, inside the system, we have the top, which actually has our CPU, and then we have all of the I/O and expansion elsewhere. Now, the CPU in this one is actually an Intel Core i5-9600T, which is a relatively high-end 6-core solution that's a 35-watt TDP CPU, but relatively high-end solution in this space. The higher clock speeds actually put it into a completely different performance category than something like an older generation Core i5-6500T, which would have been a predecessor from 3 generations prior, but this thing absolutely blows it away. These also came with 8th generation processors, so you do want to check between them. There wasn't actually that much of a difference between the two. However, especially in the 9th generation, there was something that was really cool, and that is that there's actually a Core i9 8-core 16-thread CPU that can go in here. Now, I'm way too cheap for that kind of model, but it is possible, so you can look for that. All right, so let's keep going. Beyond the CPU, if we go below the CPU, what you can actually see is that we have a 2.5-inch hard drive assembly. Now, this 2.5-inch hard drive assembly is super easy. It's completely toolless. You snap out this plastic bracket. It has pegs for the hard drive or SSD that's 2.5 inch that you want to put there. You get a SATA connection, and it's a little floopy SATA cable, but if you kind of look at this thing, it's actually really cool because that floopy little SATA cable provides both data and power in a single small ribbon cable that's much smaller than what you would see on a typical enthusiast desktop. We tend to prefer the hard-mounted versions more because those are just kind of a little easier to work with and you don't have to really worry about them as much as these. But at the same time, this works and keeps the solution toolless for Lenovo, so we'll give them a good mark for that. Underneath the assembly, we also have an M.2 slot, which is specifically for Wi-Fi. Now, our unit, even though it's a relatively new unit, did not come with Wi-Fi installed. There are various Intel and Realtek units that you could get, but specifically, if you are looking for a feature like vPro, you actually have to have a specific Intel NIC that supports vPro to be able to do vPro over wireless. Now, on the wired side, we actually had an Intel i219LM NIC, which was really common in a number of these platforms and is just kind of the go-to NIC. So if you have a specific OS need that you need to check compatibility for, or if you want to go sideload a driver into VMware or whatever, you go look up the Intel i219LM, and that's what's in here. Now, something that Lenovo does in their systems that's a little bit different than what you see in some other systems is that they don't just use the top part of the motherboard. They actually have this nice little slide-out case bit that you can pull out, boom, pop off. Again, you don't need tools to do that. You just pop it off, and then you're inside. And down here, you actually get a couple cool features. So first off, we get very easy access to the 2 DIMMs. Now, there are 2 SO DIMMs here. We were able to test 2x32 for 64 gigabytes of memory. That worked fine. So you can get a 2x32 gig DRAM kit, DDR4 DRAM kit, put it in here, and you can actually get 64 gigs of memory in this system. Especially if you're at the Core i5 or Core i7, i9 level, that's going to be really useful because you're probably going to want more than just, say, 16 or 32 gigs of RAM. Now, the other thing you're going to see here is something that most likely did not come from the factory, and that is that this has a 256 gigabyte silicon power NVMe SSD. Now, many of these systems did come with 256 gig NVMe SSDs. We're not really sure if this was a stock. It doesn't look like it's a stock SSD, but who knows? You can put one NVMe SSD here, but you can see that there's a second NVMe slot. That's actually depopulated on this, so you cannot put a second NVMe drive in here. A nice little feature on the NVMe drive is that you have a tiny blue peg, and that little peg allows you to do a toolless NVMe drive installation. One of the big features in the Project Tiny Mini Micro space is that all of the vendors offer more and more toolless serviceability on their higher end models, and this being one of the higher end models, you actually see that. In terms of performance, the Intel Core i5 9600T is just kind of phenomenal. I mean, this is definitely not the most powerful system in the world by any means. And in fact, if you want to go look at some of the kind of current generation Xeon Ws, if you want to look at kind of a comparable modern generation kind of higher end processor, you can look at the Xeon W 1270 review that John just did on the STH main site. And this performance is just nowhere near what that is. This is a 35 watt TDP CPU, so it's not necessarily going to have the thermal and power headroom to be able to scale up to high frequencies. At the same time, if you consider that in the 7th gen Core systems that a Core i5, say 7500T, was a 4-core part, this is actually a huge upgrade. A lot of that is due to the fact that AMD entered the market and Ryzen is actually pushing core counts. And so because of that, we actually get a better product in the space. The other thing that we want to mention in terms of performance and features of the CPU is that this CPU offers vPro support, which means that you can get remote manageability, can get that remote IKVM support. Now, something that we saw in our specific unit was that we had an Intel Core i5 with vPro sticker, so we kind of knew that this one would support vPro. You do have to be a little careful because not all the CPU models support vPro. You have to have the right NICs. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to go on to make sure that you do have vPro support. So I would look, actually, as one of my tips, is I would actually look for that sticker that says it has vPro support. The other big feature that these CPUs had is that they had the Intel 630 graphics, and that allows you to do things such as have hardware transcoding. If you're going to use this system for something like Plex, it's a very easy way to go plug something like this in and get that hardware accelerated transcoding. Now, in all of our Project Tiny Mini Micro node pieces, we always have some kind of key takeaway. And for this system, it was actually kind of hard to come up with one, other than the fact that I absolutely love this platform. There's really not much I would change. I would have liked to have another USB port in the front of the system, but it's not something that's necessary. So we had to do a little bit more hunting than usual, and we actually did come away with a very important key takeaway, and that is the power supply. Now, these units could come with different power supplies, ranging from about 65 watts on the low end to about 130, 135 watts on the high end. Something we wanted to test is what would be the impact of using a 65 watt power supply. And what we found was that at kind of the lower end of the spectrum, actually it was just absolutely fine. We didn't have a lot plugged in. But once we started plugging devices in, especially those kind of higher end USB SSDs that are 10 gigabit per second USB SSDs, what we actually saw was that we started overshooting that power supply. And when we did that, we actually saw the CPU cut back its power consumption and then vastly constrain performance. So our key takeaway on this system is to make sure that you have at least the 90 watt power brick. Even if I had the 90 watt power brick, I might go get a 130 watt power brick just to be safe. The power supplies in this system are all shared with Lenovo's laptop line, and there's absolutely tons of them out there. They're not expensive to go out and get secondhand or just go get replacements for. So my personal preference is to go get a bigger power supply than you would need. Overall, this unit was absolutely awesome, and for $475, we thought it was probably on a little bit of the pricier side of all the systems that we've purchased, but it's frankly well worth it. I mean, it has basically everything that you would want in a system like this, and overall, thought it was great. Hey, and if you made it this far, why don't you click on subscribe, turn on those notifications so you can see whenever we come out with new videos. Now, we have new videos and guides on STH and new reviews that we don't even do on the YouTube channel, so you can check out the main site as well. And as always, thanks for watching and have an awesome day.